At 39 years old, Marcus Washington was an artist of the unseen. His medium was air, his tools were gauges and wrenches, and his canvas was the intricate network of ducts and machinery hidden within the walls of Charlotte's homes. For a salary of $61,000 a year, he didn't just fix air conditioners, he brought comfort. He banished the oppressive North Carolina humidity. He made homes livable. He was a master craftsman, and his reputation for honesty and skill, built over 2 decades, was the most valuable thing he owned, or so he thought. The call came at 5:42 a.m. on a Tuesday in July. The sun was still a faint promise below the horizon, and the air held the cool, damp stillness of pre-dawn. The phone's vibration on his nightstand was an unwelcome intrusion. It was his work phone, a sturdy but aging Samsung Galaxy S8 he'd bought refurbished for $150 3 years ago. A call at this hour usually meant an emergency, a complete system failure in the dead of summer. He expected panic. He did not expect this. "Marcus, it's Eleanor Gable." Her voice was thin and crackled with age. Mrs. Gable was one of his first ever clients, a sweet, elderly woman who lived alone in a tidy brick ranch in the Dilworth neighborhood. He'd been servicing her 25-year-old train unit for 15 years. "Mrs. Gable, is everything all right? Is the unit out?" "Oh, no, dear, it's running just fine. You always take such good care of it," she said. Then a pause. I got this email, and I was so surprised. I can't believe you didn't tell me." Marcus sat up in bed, the sheets pooling around his waist. The other side of the bed was empty and cold. Simone hadn't come home last night, claiming a friend was having a crisis. "Tell you what, ma'am? That you're retiring? Oh, it's wonderful for you, I'm sure. A well-deserved rest. But we'll all miss you so much. It says your brother-in-law's company will be taking over your clients. Apex Climate Solutions? So professional sounding." The words didn't compute. Retiring? He was 39. He had bills to pay and a life to build. "Mrs. Gable, I think there's been some kind of mistake. I'm not retiring." "But the email says—" She sounded flustered. "It has your picture and everything. It says you're a co-founder and you'll be in a strategic advisory role. It's all very impressive. Can I forward it to you? I just wanted to wish you well." A cold dread, colder than any refrigerant leak, began to seep into Marcus's bones. "Yes, please. Please forward it to me." He hung up and stared at the dark screen of his phone. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. A moment later, a notification pinged. An email forwarded from Eleanor Gable. The subject line read, "An exciting new chapter for Marcus Washington." He opened it. The design was slick, corporate, a deep blue and silver logo of a mountain peak with the words Apex Climate Solutions underneath. Below it, side by side, were 2 professionally shot headshots. On the left was Simone's brother, Julian, smirking with the easy confidence of a man who'd never gotten his hands dirty. On the right was him. It was a photo from 2 years ago, taken at a family barbecue, a candid shot where he was laughing. They had cropped it and placed it against a generic gray background. Beneath the photos, the text began. "Apex Climate Solutions is proud to announce its launch, bringing a new standard of excellence to Charlotte's climate control needs. We are honored to be led by CEO Julian Croft and co-founder Marcus Washington." "Co-founder?" he read on, his breath catching in his throat. After a storied 20-year career serving the Charlotte community, Marcus is transitioning from day-to-day field operations to a strategic advisory role, ensuring his legacy of quality and customer care continues under the Apex banner. His existing clients will now be seamlessly serviced by the Apex team. His client list, his legacy, his name, stolen. He scrolled to the bottom of the email. It was a mass email, but he could tell from the way Mrs. Gable had forwarded it that his entire customer database, the one he had spent 20 years building one handshake at a time, had been blind copied. They had sent it to everyone. A wave of nausea washed over him. This was Julian's doing. It had his slick, empty ambition written all over it. But he couldn't have done it alone. The photo. The client list. A new, more terrible understanding began to dawn. He thought of the cold side of the bed. He thought of the savings account. With trembling fingers, he opened his banking app. He and Simone shared a joint savings account at Wells Fargo. It was their future. Every spare dollar went into it. Last week, it held $14,750, the result of years of careful budgeting and his own grueling side jobs. He tapped on the account. The screen loaded. Balance, $8.14. The number hung there, stark and mocking. He clicked on the transaction history. A single entry from yesterday afternoon. Wire transfer, outgoing, $14,741.86. The air left his lungs in a silent rush. He stood up and walked out of the bedroom of their modest West End duplex, the one they'd rented for 6 years for $1,300 a month. The floorboards of the 1960s-era home creaked under his feet. In the living room, a single sheet of paper sat on their worn, $400 IKEA coffee table. It was Simone's handwriting. He didn't need to read it to know what it said, but he picked it up anyway. I need to be with someone who has a future. I can't wait around for your little garage hobbies to go somewhere. Julian is building an empire, and I'm going to be a part of it. This is for the best, Marcus. You're finished. You're finished. The words echoed the ones she'd thrown at him just a few nights ago, dripping with scorn. He looked around the small room, at the life they had built. The $89 Timex watch on his wrist, a gift from her. The framed photo of their wedding day on the mantel, a day that had cost them $5,000 they could barely afford. All of it felt like a stage set for a play whose tragic ending he was only now beginning to comprehend. At 5:49 a.m., with $8 to his name and his life's work stolen, Marcus Washington was, by all appearances, completely and utterly finished. But he had no idea how wrong they were. The facade of their life had been built on such ordinary things. It was a mosaic of domestic normalcy, each piece carefully placed to hide the cracks forming underneath. Their duplex on a quiet street in Charlotte's West End was humble but neat. Marcus was the one who kept it that way. He was the one who spent a Saturday replacing the worn-out garbage disposal, a $120 InSinkErator model from Lowe's, while Simone was out getting a $90 manicure. He was the one who fixed the perpetually dripping faucet in the bathroom, a simple 10-cent O-ring replacement that he'd been meaning to get to. "You're so good with your hands," Simone would say, a comment that felt less like a compliment and more like a classification. Their finances were a delicate dance. His $61,000 salary as an HVAC technician was the bedrock, stable, and reliable. Simone worked part-time as a receptionist at a high-end salon in South Park, bringing in about $22,000 a year. They managed. Their biggest luxury was their 2014 Honda Accord, purchased used for $11,000, which Marcus maintained himself, changing the oil every 5,000 miles without fail. Anniversaries were celebrated not with lavish trips, but with a carefully chosen dinner at a place like the Fig Tree, a $200 indulgence that they would talk about for weeks. They were a team, he thought, chipping away at a shared future. But there was another current running beneath the surface, one of admiration and aspiration that flowed exclusively from Simone to her brother, Julian. Julian Croft was the opposite of Marcus in every conceivable way. Where Marcus was quiet, Julian was loud. Where Marcus's value was in his labor, Julian's was in his talk. He lived in a sprawling 6,000 square foot new build in Myers Park, a $1.2 million monument to questionable taste and leveraged credit. He drove a white BMW 3 Series, a $43,000 car leased, as Marcus later learned, by a previous failed startup. Evenings with Julian were an exercise in subtle humiliation. 6 months before the end, they were invited to dinner at his estate. Marcus felt out of place the moment he parked their humble Honda behind Julian's gleaming BMW. Inside, the house was a cavern of white marble and gray furniture. It felt cold, impersonal, like a hotel lobby. Julian, wearing a casual but clearly expensive Tom Ford polo shirt that likely cost more than Marcus's entire wardrobe, greeted them with a hug for his sister and a firm, condescending pat on Marcus's shoulder. "Marcus, good to see you, man," he said, his eyes scanning Marcus's simple $30 button-down from Old Navy. "Simone, you look incredible." She was wearing a new dress, a $350 piece from Nordstrom she'd told Marcus was on sale. Dinner was served on a massive dining table that could have seated 20. It was just the three of them. Julian had ordered catering from a trendy restaurant, a spread that must have cost at least $500. As they ate, the conversation inevitably turned to business, Julian's business. "The key, Marcus," Julian began, swirling a glass of $80 a bottle Cabernet, "is scalability. You've got a skill, sure, people trust you, but you're one man. You can only fix so many AC units in a day. You're a service call, not a businessman." Marcus felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He'd heard versions of this speech a dozen times. "I do all right," Marcus said quietly. "My clients are loyal." "Exactly," Julian pounced, pointing a fork at him. "Loyalty. That's the asset. Not you, not your time. The client list. That's the gold mine you're sitting on and doing nothing with." Simone nodded eagerly, her eyes shining with adoration for her brother. "He's right, baby. Listen to him. Julian knows how these things work. You could be so much more. What you need," Julian continued, leaning forward conspiratorially, "is to leverage that goodwill. Create a brand. You become the face, the quality seal, and you have a team of younger, cheaper guys doing the actual work. You take a cut. That's a business." To Marcus, it sounded like exploiting customers and underpaying technicians. His business was built on his personal guarantee. But he stayed silent, not wanting to upset Simone. "Let me see your list sometime," Julian said, waving his hand dismissively, as if the idea were a minor thought. "I could probably map out a growth strategy for you, just to help you see the potential." Marcus, wanting to be a good husband, wanting to show Simone he was listening, eventually agreed. A few weeks later, he brought his old $400 Dell laptop to a family cookout and showed Julian his database, a simple but meticulously organized Excel spreadsheet containing the names, addresses, and service histories of over 400 clients. Julian's eyes had a predatory gleam as he looked at the screen. "This is good," he'd murmured. "This is very, very good." While Marcus was busy at the grill, flipping $40 worth of burgers and hot dogs, Julian came over with a clipboard. "Hey man, quick favor. I'm spitballing some ideas with a potential investor. He wants everyone even peripherally involved to sign a standard NDA. Protects you, protects me. Just sign here." He pointed to a line on the bottom of a densely printed document. The sun was in Marcus's eyes, and the smell of charcoal was thick in the air. He trusted Julian, or rather, he trusted Simone's trust in Julian. He scribbled his name, not reading the paragraphs of fine print above it. It was a critical mistake. That signature, he would later learn, was not on an NDA. It was on a consent form, later attached to a fraudulent document naming him a founding partner of Apex Climate Solutions, ceding control of his intellectual property, his name and reputation, to the corporation. The garage was Marcus's sanctuary, It was the one place where he wasn't just a service call. It was cramped and smelled of metal and oil. There, amidst the clutter of old parts and specialized tools, was his real passion project. For 5 years, he had been tinkering, designing, and perfecting a small device, a variable flow refrigerant module. It was a deceptively simple-looking box of coils and sensors, but it solved a problem that had plagued the HVAC industry for decades: inefficiency in fluctuating temperatures. His module allowed an AC unit to adjust its refrigerant flow with microscopic precision, saving up to 30% on energy costs. It was revolutionary. 2 years earlier, after spending $4,500 of his own money saved from side jobs, he had filed a provisional patent with the help of an online legal service. Simone knew about it, but only in the vaguest sense. She called it his tinkering. "Still playing with your little gadgets?" she'd ask, poking her head into the garage, her tone a mixture of amusement and pity. She'd be dressed for a night out with her friends, holding her $1,200 Louis Vuitton bag, a gift from Julian. "Don't stay out here all night. You have that call in the morning." He tried to explain it to her once, spreading the blueprints out on the kitchen table. "See, if this valve can adjust in real time based on the ambient humidity, and not just the temperature, the compressor doesn't have to work as hard. It could save people hundreds of dollars a year." She'd glanced at the complex diagrams, her eyes glazing over. "That's nice, honey," she'd said, before changing the subject. "Did I tell you Julian is thinking of getting into commercial real estate? He says that's where the real money is." The contrast was a constant, grinding presence in their marriage. Her brother's hypothetical, high-flying ventures were business. His own tangible, world-changing invention was a hobby. The foundation of their life together wasn't just made of wood and nails. It was made of these small, painful dismissals, and the cracks were spreading wider every day. The cruelty did not arrive in a single, crashing wave. It was a slow tide, rising incrementally over months, each new level marked by a casual comment or a calculated deception. The outrage accumulated in Marcus's soul like silt, slowly and silently, until it became a suffocating weight. The business advice dinner at Julian's $1.2 million Myers Park estate was the first major surge. Surrounded by the cold grandeur of Julian's success, Marcus felt his own life measured and found wanting. The entire evening was a performance, with Julian as the star and Marcus as the hapless subject. "Look, I respect what you do," Julian said, leaning back in his chair, the picture of magnanimous condescension. "It's honest work. But honest work doesn't buy a house like this. It doesn't create generational wealth." Simone, seated beside Marcus, reached over and placed a hand on his arm. Her touch felt less like support and more like restraint. "He's just trying to help you, baby. We want you to have more. We deserve more." The "we" hung in the air. It was a "we" that included her ambitions, her brother's greed, but seemed to have little room for Marcus's own contentment or principles. "You're sitting on a gold mine," Julian repeated, the theme of the night. 400 clients. Let's say they're each worth on average $500 a year in service calls and checkups. That's a $200,000 a year business right there. But you're only taking home 60 grand. Where's the rest going? Overhead? Time? Inefficiency. "It's my time," Marcus said, his voice quiet but firm. "I do the work myself. That's what they pay for." Julian laughed, a short, barking sound. "No, Marcus. They pay for a cold house in August. They don't care who turns the wrench. You're emotionally attached to the labor. A real businessman is emotionally detached. He builds a system, not a service." It was then that he'd pushed for the client list, framing it as a favor. "Let me just look at the data. No names if you're paranoid, just the numbers. I can show you the revenue model you're leaving on the table. It was a lie, of course. He wanted the names. And Marcus, worn down by the two-front assault and the desire for a peaceful life with his wife, eventually gave them to him. The next layer of betrayal was the signature. The family barbecue was a smokescreen. Children were running around. Music was playing. And Marcus was focused on not burning the chicken. Julian approached him with the casual air of a man asking for the time. "Hey, buddy, just that NDA thing we talked about," he'd said, handing him the clipboard and a pen. "My guy is antsy. Just initial at the bottom." Marcus, distracted, glanced down. The page was filled with dense, legalistic text. He saw the words non-disclosure agreement at the top of the first page, but Julian was holding the clipboard so that the first page was flipped back, showing only the signature page of a different document entirely. A document he later learned was the Articles of Incorporation for Apex Climate Solutions, LLC. His forged signature was listed right under Julian's, eternally binding him as a co-founder. The casualness of the deception was breathtaking. He had branded Marcus like cattle with a smile on his face. The financial blow was the most visceral. It came just a week before the end. Simone approached him one evening, her face a mask of practiced distress. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she held a crumpled tissue in her hand. "Marcus," she'd whispered, her voice thick with fake emotion. "It's my mom. She needs a procedure. It's not covered by her insurance. It's a lot." Marcus's heart went out to her. He loved his mother-in-law. "Of course, baby. How much? Whatever she needs, we'll make it work." Simone looked down, as if ashamed to say the number. "They need it up front. $15,000? The number was a punch to the gut. It was almost their entire savings. The $14,750 they had painstakingly accumulated, dollar by dollar. It was their emergency fund, their down payment fund, their dream fund. That's everything, Simone?" "I know," she'd said, tears now freely rolling down her cheeks. "I know, and I hate to ask, but it's my mother. What else can we do? We'll build it back up. I'll take extra shifts." Looking at his wife, her face contorted in what he believed to be genuine anguish, he couldn't say no. It was family. It was what you did. The next morning, he went to the Wells Fargo branch on his lunch break and authorized the wire transfer. Not to a hospital, he realized in hindsight, but to a newly opened corporate bank account for a company named Apex Climate Solutions. He had personally funded the weapon that would be used to destroy him. The final act of cruelty, the one that would echo in his mind for years, was a quiet, verbal shiv delivered in the intimacy of their own bedroom. It was 2 nights before the discovery. He was excited. He'd just received an email from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. His patent for the variable flow refrigerant module, application number 15/247832, had been officially granted. After years of work and waiting, it was his. He came into the bedroom, his face alight with a joy she hadn't seen in years. "Simone, you're not going to believe this. The patent, it came through. It's official. The M1 module is mine." He expected her to share his excitement, to see finally that his hobby was something real. Instead, she looked up from her phone, her expression utterly blank. Then she laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a short, sharp, dismissive sound that cut him to the quick. "The what? Oh, that thing in the garage?" she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Honey, that's sweet." "Really?" "Sweet? Simone, this is huge. This could change everything for us." She finally put her phone down and sat up, her face hardening. "Marcus, can we be real for 1 second? You are an HVAC guy. You fix things. You don't invent them. No big company is going to pay you for some gadget you cobbled together next to the lawnmower. It's a fantasy. It's not a fantasy. The science is sound. I have a patent. A piece of paper, she shot back, her voice rising. Julian files for patents all the time. It doesn't mean anything. You need a business, a plan, connections, things you don't have. You're almost 40 years old, and you're still playing with toys in the garage. When are you going to grow up and accept what you are? The cruelty of it stole his breath. And what is that? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. She stood up and looked down at him, her eyes cold and hard. You're a good technician, Marcus. Maybe the best, but that's your ceiling. That's all you'll ever be. It's time you stopped trying to be something you're not. You're finished. She turned and walked out of the room, leaving him standing there. The official patent notification feeling as worthless as a losing lottery ticket in his hand. You're finished. The words were not just an insult. They were a verdict. She had already passed sentence. The email, the stolen money, the empty side of the bed, they were merely the execution. The betrayal had happened long before in her heart, where she had looked at his dreams and pronounced them dead. The world shrank to the four corners of his phone screen. At 5:42 a.m., it had been a tool. By 5:49 a.m., it was an artifact from a buried civilization, a life that no longer existed. The email from Apex Climate Solutions burned on the screen, a digital tombstone for his career. Every word was a meticulously crafted lie, built upon a kernel of his truth. His name, his reputation for quality, his 20 years of service, all hollowed out and repurposed to serve their greed. He stood in the center of his small living room, the note from Simone clutched in his hand. The silence of the duplex was immense. It was the silence of absence, of a future that had been there when he went to sleep and was gone when he woke up. His first instinct was rage, a white-hot, primal urge to smash something, to drive to that absurd mansion in Myers Park and scream until his lungs gave out. But another instinct, colder and more powerful, took over. It was the technician in him, the problem solver. When a complex system fails, you don't kick the machine. You observe. You gather data. You diagnose the failure point before you ever pick up a tool. His life was now a failed system, and he needed to understand exactly how it had been broken. He sat down on his worn, $300 sofa and forced himself to breathe. He reread the email from Apex, but this time he wasn't reading it as a victim. He was reading it as an investigator. Co-founder Marcus Washington. They had used his name legally, they thought. That signature on the barbecue NDA was the key. Transitioning from day-to-day field operations, a euphemism for, we've stolen his job. His legacy of quality and customer care continues under the Apex banner. They weren't just stealing his future, they were claiming his past. He noticed a detail at the very bottom, a physical address for Apex Climate Solutions. It was a suite in a new glass and steel office building in South Park, one of the most expensive commercial districts in Charlotte. Rent there would be astronomical, easily $10,000 a month or more. His $14,750 wouldn't have been enough for a security deposit. This was bigger. They had other money. His savings had been a final, insulting cash grab, not the primary investment. The forwarded email from Mrs. Gable was the first piece of evidence. He saved it to a secure folder on his laptop, then created a new document. He titled it Case File Apex. He opened his banking app again. The balance was still a mocking $8.14. He took a screenshot. He then went to the wire transfer details. It showed the receiving account number and the name of the beneficiary, Apex Climate Solutions, LLC. Evidence. He screenshotted it. He walked into his small home office, a converted closet. On his desk was the file folder containing the paperwork for his patent. He pulled out the official certificate from the USPTO, the one she had laughed at. The embossed seal, the formal language, the patent number 15/247832. It felt heavy, real. It was the one piece of his life they didn't know the true value of. They thought it was a hobby, a piece of paper. They had no idea it was a weapon. He placed the patent certificate next to his laptop. Then he remembered something else. The NDA. He had a copy of it somewhere. He'd tossed it in a drawer, thinking it was unimportant. He rummaged through a miscellaneous file and found it. It was, as Julian had claimed, a standard non-disclosure agreement. He read it carefully. It was 2 pages long. He looked at his signature at the bottom. Then he remembered the clipboard at the barbecue. Julian had been holding it oddly, the pages slightly askew. On a hunch, he held the 2 pages up to the light. The staple holes didn't quite line up. He carefully removed the staple. He held the second page, the one with his signature, up to the light again. Faintly, he could see an indentation from the page that had been on top of it when he signed. It wasn't the text of the NDA. It was the outline of a different signature block, one with lines for founder and co-founder. They had put the signature page of the incorporation document under the NDA and had him sign, the pressure of the pen creating a carbonless copy of his signature on the fraudulent document beneath. It was deviously simple. The cold, methodical calm held. This wasn't a time for emotion. This was a time for documentation. His phone buzzed again. A text from Simone. "I left some of my things. Julian will send a mover for them tomorrow. Just leave the key under the mat when you move out." When you move out. She hadn't just left him. She had already evicted him from their life. The cruelty was as breathtaking as it was efficient. He screenshotted the text message, another piece of evidence for the file. The sun was rising now, casting long shadows across the living room floor. The light illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. His world had been dismantled in the dark, and now, in the light, he was seeing the pieces for what they were. They thought he was finished. They thought he was just a man with a toolbox and a strong back. They had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated the man, and they had no idea about the patent. He was not finished. He was just getting started. The plan required a new version of himself. The warm, trusting Marcus had to be packed away, stored in a place where Simone and Julian couldn't reach him. In his place emerged a man of unnerving calm, a man who could smile while his world was burning because he was the one who would eventually control the fire. Playing dumb was the hardest acting job of his life, and each scene was a masterclass in strategic restraint. His first performance was the phone call to Simone, about an hour after he discovered the carnage. He dialed her number, his heart a steady, cold rhythm in his chest. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice clipped and impatient. "What, Marcus?" He pitched his voice to sound broken, confused. "Simone, where are you? I woke up and you were gone. I saw your note. I don't understand." "There's nothing to understand," she said, her tone devoid of any emotion. "I told you. It's over. I'm at Julian's. I've moved on with my life." "Moved on? Just like that?" he asked, letting a tremor enter his voice. "And the savings?" "The account is empty, Simone. What happened to the money for your mom?" There was a brief pause. He could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she calibrated her lie. "There was no emergency, Marcus," she said, her voice now laced with a chilling pragmatism. "That was my investment capital, my half of our assets. I invested it in my future." "In Apex." "Your half?" he repeated, feigning shock. "That was everything we had. It was everything you had, she corrected him. I have a future now. You should be happy for me. He ended the call, his hand steady. He had recorded the entire conversation using a simple $10 app he'd just downloaded. Her admission that there was no family emergency, that she considered the stolen money her investment capital, was now a digital file, saved and backed up. Exhibit A. His next stop was the belly of the beast, Julian's Myers Park estate. He drove his 2014 Honda Accord and parked it on the street, a dingy-looking vessel in a sea of luxury German cars. He walked up the long, paved driveway to the oversized front door. He rang the bell. Julian answered, wearing a silk robe that probably cost $500. He had the decency to look momentarily surprised, but it quickly melted into his default expression of smug pity. Marcus, what are you doing here? Julian, Simone left me, Marcus said, playing the part of the bewildered, heartbroken husband. She said she's here, and my clients are calling me, saying I've retired. What the hell is going on? Julian's face softened into a mask of false sympathy. He draped a proprietary arm over Marcus's shoulder, guiding him into the cavernous, marble-floored foyer. Come on in, man. Let's talk. He led Marcus into a vast office. The room was dominated by a single piece of furniture, a massive, gleaming mahogany desk that screamed, I'm important. It must have cost at least $15,000, and sitting right on top of it, next to a sleek Apple monitor, was Marcus's client binder, the worn, blue, 3-ring binder where he kept the paper records of all his customers. He'd mentioned to Simone a month ago that his laptop was acting up, and he was relying on his paper backup. She must have taken it before she left. Look, Marcus, Julian began, settling into his $2,000 leather office chair. I know this is hard, but Simone sees the big picture, and frankly, we're doing you a favor. A favor? You blew up my business. We elevated your business, Julian corrected him smoothly. You were stuck, man. A hamster on a wheel. We've given you a legacy. A title. Co-founder. Your name is on the door. You should be thanking us. You're free from the dirty work now. You can relax. Marcus just stared at him, letting his silence be mistaken for shock and defeat. He nodded slowly. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Julian said, standing up and patting him on the back again. Just accept that this is for the best. For all of us. As he was being ushered out, he saw Simone at the top of the grand staircase. She was wearing Julian's silk robe. She looked down at him, her expression not of guilt, but of cold, hard triumph. She didn't say a word. The final, most humiliating act of this play was the retirement party. A week later, Julian and Simone insisted he attend the official launch party for Apex Climate Solutions, which they had billed to his clients as a celebration of his career. It was held at a trendy, upscale bar in South End they had rented out for the evening for a cool $5,000. Marcus wore his only suit, a simple black one from Men's Warehouse, that had cost him $300 5 years ago for a wedding. He felt like a ghost at his own funeral. Simone, dazzling in a $2,400 Burberry dress and holding a glass of champagne, greeted him at the door. Smile, Marcus, she hissed, her voice a low command. You look like someone just died. This is a celebration, our celebration. He spent the next 2 hours shaking hands with his own clients, people he'd known for years, people who had trusted him in their homes. They were all confused. Marcus, you're too young to retire, said Mr. Abernathy, a man for whom he'd installed a whole new system just last year. We're going to miss you, said another, but this new company seems very professional. He just smiled, a hollow, aching gesture. They'll take good care of you, he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The peak of the humiliation came when Julian took the microphone. "I want to propose a toast," he announced to the crowd of about 100 people, "to a man who laid the foundation, a man whose hard work and dedication built the reputation that we at Apex are proud to carry forward. To my friend, my partner, and my brother-in-law, Marcus Washington, to his retirement." The room erupted in applause. They were applauding his murder, professionally speaking. He saw Simone beaming at her brother, her eyes full of pride. In that moment, standing alone in a crowd of people he knew, Marcus felt an absolute sense of clarity. The grief was gone. The hurt was gone. All that remained was a cold, hard resolve. He raised his glass of club soda. He smiled. He let them believe they had won. It was the only way to ensure their defeat would be absolute. The transition from victim to strategist began in a small, unassuming office in Charlotte's University City. There were no glass walls, no mahogany desks. The furniture was functional, the art on the walls was local, and the diplomas were from Howard and UNC Chapel Hill. This was the office of Alana Hayes, attorney at law. She was a black woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm, commanding presence that filled the small room. Marcus's pastor had recommended her, calling her a woman who fights for David against Goliath. Her hourly rate was $450, a fortune to Marcus now. But he knew it was an investment he had to make. He sat across from her, his case file folder open on his lap. For 30 minutes, he laid out the story in a calm, chronological narrative, his voice never wavering. He presented the evidence with the precision of a technician diagnosing a fault. The email from Apex, the screenshots of the bank account and the wire transfer, the recording of the phone call with Simone, the mismatched staple holes on the NDA, and finally, the centerpiece, the official, embossed patent certificate for the M1 variable flow module. Alana listened without interruption, her fingers steepled under her chin. She examined each piece of evidence, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. "Mr. Washington?" she said finally, her voice a low, resonant hum. "They did not just steal your money and your client list. They committed several serious felonies. The wire transfer of your savings under false pretenses is wire fraud. Using your name and likeness in their marketing and corporate filings without your true consent is identity theft and fraud. Forging your signature on the articles of incorporation. That's a state-level crime that prosecutors take very seriously." Marcus nodded. "So I sue them." Alana held up a hand. A lawsuit is a slow, grinding process. It can take years, it would bleed you dry, and they would use every delay tactic in the book. By the time you won, Apex would be an established company, and your victory would be a footnote. We are not going to sue them. Not yet. "Then what do we do?" Marcus asked, a flicker of his old frustration returning. "We render a lawsuit unnecessary," she said, a faint, sharp smile touching her lips. "Their greatest asset right now is your stolen reputation. Their entire business model is predicated on the lie that you are their partner. We are going to publicly and spectacularly prove that you are not." She picked up his patent certificate, handling it with a reverence that Simone never had. "This," she said, tapping the paper, "is not a hobby. This is a nuclear bomb. They have no idea it's about to detonate." The strategy she laid out was audacious and brilliant. It wasn't about courts and judges. It was about the court of public opinion and the ruthless logic of the market. "First," Alana said, her voice all business, "we engage a forensic document examiner to analyze the signature on the incorporation filing. It will cost you about $2,000, but their expert testimony will be irrefutable proof of forgery. Marcus swallowed hard. $2,000 was a mountain of money he didn't have. "I have $8, Miss Hayes." "I'm aware," she said not unkindly. "I will cover the cost for now against the future settlement. I believe in this case." Relief washed over Marcus, so potent it almost made him dizzy. "Thank you." "Second," she continued, "we need to establish the value of this patent. I have a contact, a patent broker who specializes in HVAC and energy efficiency tech. We're going to get a valuation, but more than that, we're going to find a buyer, a big one." Over the next few weeks, Alana was a whirlwind of focused activity. She hired the document examiner, who confirmed within days that the signature on the Apex filing was a high-quality forgery, likely traced from a legitimate sample. She engaged the patent broker, a man named Chen, who, after examining Marcus's designs and the working prototype from his garage, became visibly excited. "This is elegant," Chen had said, turning the small metal box over in his hands. "It's not just theoretical, it's robust, manufacturable. This solves the single biggest efficiency problem for residential and commercial units. Every major manufacturer is trying to crack this." Chen made some calls. A week later, he had a meeting lined up. Not with a small firm, but with Climacore, one of the 3 largest HVAC manufacturers in North America. Their headquarters were in Atlanta, but their lead R&D team was based in Raleigh. They were, Chen explained, desperate. New federal energy standards were coming, and their current technology couldn't meet the threshold without a complete, multi-billion-dollar redesign. Marcus's module was a potential shortcut worth a fortune. Alana prepped Marcus for the meeting like a prize fighter. "You are not a humble technician asking for a break," she instructed him. "You are the sole inventor of a paradigm-shifting technology. You have all the leverage. Let the invention speak for itself. Be calm, be precise, be the expert you are." While this was happening, Marcus continued to play his part. He ignored the increasingly frequent calls from Apex, forwarded to him by former clients, complaining about shoddy work and missed appointments by the new, inexperienced technicians Julian had hired. He let the pressure build. He let the poison of their incompetence spread through the business they had stolen. He was gathering data, not just on their initial crime, but on the ongoing damage it was causing. Every complaint was another nail in their coffin. He was no longer just a victim of a theft. He was a witness to a fraud in progress. The strike was not a single act of aggression, but a perfectly synchronized cascade of events, planned by Alana Hayes with the precision of a military operation. The date was set, Tuesday, October 12th. The time, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The week before, Marcus had driven to Raleigh with Alana for the meeting at Climacore's R&D facility. It was a sprawling campus of glass and steel, a world away from his garage. He was in his $300 suit, feeling both intimidated and strangely confident. He remembered Alana's words, "You are the expert here." In a conference room with a dozen engineers and 3 vice presidents in expensive suits, Marcus did what he did best. He talked about air. He talked about pressure, temperature, and flow. He laid his prototype, the M1 module, on the polished table. He used a simple PowerPoint presentation he and Alana had prepared, showing the data from the tests he had run in his own garage using a salvaged carrier unit. He didn't use fancy business jargon. He spoke the plain, clear language of a man who intimately understood the mechanics of his creation. When he finished, the room was silent. Then, the lead engineer, a man with 20 years at the company, picked up the module. "If your data is accurate," the engineer said slowly, "you've just saved us 5 years of research and probably $1 billion. The negotiation was swift. Climacore didn't want to buy the patent outright. They wanted an exclusive licensing deal. Alana, firm and unyielding, handled the numbers. By the end of the day, they had an offer that made Marcus's head spin. A $2 million upfront payment upon signing, and a 7% royalty on the net sale price of every Climacore unit that included his M1 module. The company projected sales would value the deal at over $12 million for Marcus within the first 5 years. But the masterstroke was not the money. It was a clause Alana insisted upon, one the Climacore legal team initially balked at. She demanded that the announcement of the deal be a joint press release, with specific, non-negotiable language telling Marcus's story. The release would be embargoed and distributed to national business media, tech journals, and most importantly, the Charlotte Business Journal. The morning of October 12th, the air in Marcus's duplex was thick with anticipation. The rain from the night before had stopped, and a clean, bright sunlight was beginning to filter through the windows. It felt like the world was being washed clean. He sat at his kitchen table, a mug of coffee in his hand, his laptop open. Alana was on the phone with him, a calm voice in his ear. "It's 8:55, she said. "The release goes wide in 5 minutes. Are you ready?" "I'm ready," he said. His voice was steady. Meanwhile, 5 miles away, in a sleek, rented boardroom on the 20th floor of a South Park glass tower, Julian Croft was in his element. He was wearing an $8,700 Armani suit, the physical embodiment of his fraudulent success. Simone sat at his side, a silent, adoring partner in a sharp, $1,500 theory pantsuit. They were in the final stages of a pitch to a group of 3 venture capitalists trying to secure a $500,000 seed round to expand Apex. Their entire pitch was built on the foundation of Marcus's name. And with the goodwill and established client base brought by our co-founder, Marcus Washington, we project 300% growth in the next fiscal year, Julian was saying, pointing to a graph on the large screen. Marcus's reputation is the bedrock of this company. He's the gold standard in Charlotte. One of the investors, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Chen, looked at her watch. "It's almost 9 o'clock. We have a hard stop at 9:30. "Of course," Julian said, smiling his predator's smile. "We're just getting to the best part." At 9:01 a.m., a phone buzzed on the table. Then another, and another. The 3 investors glanced at their screens. A breaking news alert from the Charlotte Business Journal. Ms. Chen's eyes narrowed. She read the headline, then looked up, her expression turning to ice. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "What is Vance Innovations?" Julian frowned. "Vance what? I've never heard of it." "That's odd," Ms. Chen said, turning her phone around for him to see. "Because its founder seems to be your co-founder." The headline was stark. Local HVAC technician licenses revolutionary invention to Climacore in deal worth millions. Below it was a picture of Marcus, not the stolen barbecue photo, but a new professional headshot. He looked confident, successful. The article detailed the story of a brilliant, overlooked inventor. It named the M1 variable flow module and the patent number. It quoted the vice president of Climacore, praising Marcus's once-in-a-generation ingenuity. It announced the $2 million signing payment and the projected $12 million valuation. Julian's face went white. The color drained from it as if a plug had been pulled. Simone leaned over his shoulder, her perfectly made-up face contorting in disbelief and horror. But the kill shot was the final paragraph. It was the quote Alana had so carefully crafted. Another investor read it aloud, his voice dripping with contempt. "Mr. Washington is excited to launch his new venture, Vance Innovations, to further develop energy-saving technologies," says his attorney, Alana Hayes. "He is not and has never been affiliated with any other local HVAC startup. Mr. Washington is currently exploring all legal options regarding the recent fraudulent use of his name, likeness, and reputation by an entity known as Apex Climate Solutions. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a world collapsing. Julian stared at the phone, his mouth slightly agape. He looked from the screen to the investors, a desperate, panicked look in his eyes. This is a mistake, a misunderstanding. He's confused. Ms. Chen stood up, gathering her papers with cold, efficient movements. The only misunderstanding, Mr. Croft, is that you thought we were fools. You built this entire presentation on a man you claimed was your partner, while that same man was simultaneously announcing to the world that you are a fraud who stole his name. The other two investors stood as well. Our meeting is over, one said. Expect to hear from our lawyers regarding the fraudulent misrepresentation in your pitch deck. We will be seeking return of our initial $50,000 due diligence deposit. They walked out of the room without a backward glance. Julian sank into his chair, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. Simone stared at the screen, her hand over her mouth, a choked, strangled sob escaping her lips. Then her phone began to ring. The caller ID read, "Mom." She ignored it. It rang again. Then Julian's phone began to buzz, an incessant, angry sound. It was his bank, then a client, then another. The coordinated strike was complete. The lie had been exposed to the world, and the consequences were just beginning to arrive. The collapse was not a single event, but a rapid, brutal unraveling. The world that Julian and Simone had built on lies and theft disintegrated with shocking speed, each piece of their downfall a direct consequence of their own actions. Marcus watched from a distance, not with glee, but with the grim satisfaction of a man seeing justice, in its own time, balance the scales. The first cascade was legal. The day after the press release, Alana Hayes hand-delivered a comprehensive file to the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office. It contained the report from the forensic document examiner proving the forgery, the recording of Simone admitting to the fraudulent pretext for the wire transfer, and sworn affidavits from a dozen of Marcus's former clients detailing the bait-and-switch tactics of Apex Climate Solutions. The public nature of the Climate ordeal and the accompanying media storm gave the DA's office all the motivation they needed. Within a week, an official investigation was launched into wire fraud, identity theft, and forgery. The second cascade was financial. Apex Climate Solutions imploded overnight. The spurned venture capitalists didn't just walk away. They filed a lawsuit for fraud and misrepresentation, seeking not only the return of their $50,000 deposit, but also punitive damages. The news of the lawsuit, coupled with the original story, spooked the bank that had given Julian a $250,000 line of credit to launch the business. Citing the fraud allegations, the bank invoked a material adverse change clause and called the loan, demanding immediate repayment in full. To secure that loan, Julian had leveraged every asset he had, including his prized $1.2 million Myers Park house. With the loan called and his accounts frozen as part of the DA's investigation, he had no way to pay. Foreclosure proceedings began immediately. The white BMW 3 Series, which was leased, was repossessed from his driveway in the middle of the day, a final humiliation for the whole neighborhood to see. The third cascade was professional and social. Julian Croft, who had styled himself as a rising star in the Charlotte business community, became a pariah. The story was toxic. He was disinvited from boards, his membership at the exclusive Carmel Country Club was revoked, and business partners who had once eagerly taken his calls now sent him straight to voicemail. He was no longer a visionary, he was a common thief in an expensive suit. For Simone, the fallout was just as devastating. Her identity had been completely tied to Julian's fraudulent success. The friends who had envied her, who had listened to her talk about their new empire, now shunned her. The whispers followed her everywhere. At the high-end salon where she worked, clients began asking not to be scheduled with her. The shame became unbearable. Within a month, she was fired. Her $1,200 Louis Vuitton bag and her $2,400 Burberry dress became meaningless symbols of a life that had evaporated, broke, and humiliated. With her name tied to a criminal investigation, she had no choice but to move back into her parents' small, cramped house in a working-class suburb, the very life she had been so desperate to escape. The final cascade was personal, and it was the ugliest. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, Julian's bravado shattered. The DA offered Simone a deal: testify against her brother, detailing his role in orchestrating the fraud, and she would face lesser charges, likely avoiding jail time. In a desperate act of self-preservation, she took it. She turned on the brother she had once idolized, providing a full confession that painted him as the mastermind and herself as a reluctant, misguided accomplice. The family was irrevocably broken, their loyalty just another casualty of Julian's greed. Marcus filed for divorce the same week the investigation was announced. The process was swift and uncontested. In the settlement, mediated by Alana, Simone received nothing. Her claim to half their assets was nullified by her fraudulent withdrawal of the funds. In fact, the judge ordered her to repay her half of the stolen $14,750, a sum of $7,370.93 to Marcus, a debt that would follow her for years. 6 months after the press release, Julian Croft pleaded guilty to wire fraud and forgery. He was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. The mahogany desk, the Armani suits, the cold marble mansion, all were liquidated to pay off a fraction of his debts. Marcus never saw him again. He read about the sentencing in the paper, sitting in the temporary corporate apartment Climacore had rented for him near their Raleigh facility. He felt no joy, no triumph. He just felt quiet. The storm had passed. The noise was over. The consequences had been delivered, not by him, but by the weight of their own choices. The scales were balanced. 2 years later, a bright, crisp Saturday morning in October found Marcus Washington in a place that smelled of new paint, fresh-cut lumber, and possibility. The sun streamed through the large, largest factory-style windows of the Vance Innovation Center, a 10,000-square-foot facility he had built from the ground up in a revitalized section of his old West End neighborhood. The $2 million signing bonus from Climacore had been the seed, but this place was the fruit of his own vision. It was part laboratory, part workshop, part classroom. A cathedral dedicated to the dignity of working with your hands. His deep brown skin was luminous in the morning light as he leaned over a workbench, his locks tied back neatly. He was no longer just a technician, he was a teacher. Every Saturday, he mentored a group of 10 high school students from a local trade program, teaching them the fundamentals of physics, engineering, and climate technology. He'd traded his $61,000 salary for a life of purpose, funded by the 7% royalty from Climacore that now amounted to more than he used to make in a year, every single month. So the liquid refrigerant absorbs the heat from inside, he explained, pointing to a cutaway model of an AC unit, and it turns into a gas. The M1 module just makes sure it uses the absolute minimum amount of liquid needed at any given second, no waste. A young girl named Brianna, her hair a cascade of intricate braids adorned with brightly colored beads that clicked softly when she moved, peered at the device. So you made it because the old way was dumb? She asked, her unfiltered honesty cutting through the technical jargon. Marcus laughed, a deep, easy sound that filled the workshop. Exactly, he said. The old way was dumb. Sometimes the most brilliant invention is just finding a smarter way to do a simple thing. He had found a new kind of wealth, one that couldn't be measured on a bank statement. It was in the rapt attention of these kids, in the gleam of understanding in their eyes. It was in creating opportunities, not just for himself, but for a new generation. He was building something that, unlike Julian's empire of lies, was real and enduring. At the end of the session, as the students were packing up, Brianna shyly approached him. She held out a folded piece of construction paper. "This is for you, Mr. Washington." He took it gently. He unfolded it. It was a drawing, rendered in the earnest, slightly skewed perspective of a teenager. It depicted a tall, smiling figure with locks, standing proudly in front of the Vance Innovation Center. With a brown crayon, she had carefully colored in the figure's skin. Underneath, in neat block letters, she had written, "Our teacher, the inventor, a great black man." A lump formed in his throat. This simple piece of paper held more value than any stock certificate or bank balance. It was a reflection of who he had become, seen through the eyes of the future he was helping to build. He folded it carefully and slid it into the pocket of his shirt, placing his hand over it. Later that evening, he was in the kitchen of his new home. It wasn't a mansion like Julian's, but a beautifully restored 1920s bungalow in the Plaza Midwood neighborhood, filled with warm wood, comfortable furniture, and a garden out back that he tended himself. It was a house that felt loved. The total cost, including renovations, was a sensible $650,000, paid in cash. He was on the phone with Alana Hayes. They had become friends, their relationship evolving from lawyer-client to one of deep mutual respect. "I got a letter today," he said, looking out the window at the setting sun. The sky was a brilliant wash of orange and purple. "Oh?" Alana's voice was warm. "Let me guess, long, full of excuses, and asking for money?" "No money," Marcus said. "Just apologies. It was from Simone." She had served 6 months of probation and was working as a cashier, trying to pay down her court-ordered restitution. He received a check from her every month for $50. The letter spoke of regret, of shame, of how she had been blinded by her brother's charisma and her own insecurities. It was a plea for forgiveness. "What are you going to do?" Alana asked gently. Marcus watched as the last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon, leaving the sky in a state of peaceful twilight. He thought of the anger that had once consumed him, and how distant it felt now. He thought of the drawing in his pocket. "I already have," he said softly. "I forgave her the day I realized my energy was better spent building my own life than watching hers fall apart. Her prison is one she built for herself. I don't have to live in it with her." He knew then the ultimate moral of his story. True wealth is not a number in an account or the square footage of a house. It is the quiet, unshakable knowledge of your own worth. It is the character you build when no one is watching, and the integrity you maintain when you are wronged. They had tried to finish him, to write the last chapter of his story for him, but they forgot the most important rule. You can't steal a man's character, and you can't forge his soul. The end of their story was just the beginning of his. What do you think is the most valuable thing a person can build in their life? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We believe stories like Marcus's show us that what we create within ourselves is the only asset that truly lasts. For more stories of justice and redemption, don't forget to subscribe to Love Beyond Pride.